I'm Nedra Knurk, President of Futura RGV. Welcome to our candidates, our moderator, Chris Artis, and all of our FaceTime viewers to our Futura RGV Forum for our Republican candidates to State Board of Education District 2. And District 2 voters tonight can watch you on Facebook page from Futura RGV, or anytime later on our website to hear how you, our candidates, want to serve our children and our schools. And first of all, I want to thank our sponsors who help us bring these programs to you. AT&T, Sam Garcia Architect, Rhodes Enterprises, Clark Chevrolet, Valley Land Title, Frost Bank, IBC Bank, DHR Health, Rio Bank, L&F Distributors, Ernie Williams, and our in-kind sponsors, Copy Zone, Upper Valley Mail Service, and CSL Productions, and Milo Rodriguez, who is our technician bringing all this to us. So thank you, Milo. I also want to thank Stephen Wingert and Gilbert Ramirez and Ryan Henry of AIM Media. AIM Media is the company that owns jointly McAllen Monitor and the Brownsville Herald, and we thank them for the use of their technical facilities and expertise in bringing these forums to you. And now I'd like to introduce someone very special. The League of Women Voters, Sophia Kennedy, is here to tell you a little bit about how they are partnering with Futura RGV to bring you more information about all the candidates on their Vote 411. Sophia, can you give them some information?
Yes, that's right. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. My name is Sophia Kennedy, and I am with the Rio Grande Valley League of Women Voters, as well as with the Texas Turnout Coalition. And tonight we are gathering information because it is all going to go towards a voter's guide. So all the we want to represent your positions, your ideas, and so all the questions that are being asked of you today your answers will be noted, and then we will transfer those to this voter's guide. Anybody interested, any voter out there interested in getting to know you as a candidate can go to vote411.org and access all this very valuable information. So all the best to the candidates, and thank you, Nedra, and all of Futura RGV for putting together these forums, which are invaluable to our communities. Thank you for inviting us.
And thank you, Sophia, for partnering with us. You have a very valuable service. And Futura RGV's mission is to educate and inform our communities about issues that relate to quality of life. And certainly good government is a very important one. And so tonight, Chris Artis, who is our moderator. Chris is a retired McAllen ISD teacher. She's a freelance writer, and she is an education blogger. And she is very knowledgeable about a lot of things that are important to our kids and our schools. So Chris, you are on. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Nedra, and thank you again to Futura McAllen, the entire team, and to the League of Women Voters. I want to start by really thanking LJ Francis and Hilda DeShazo, the two candidates who will be running in the Republican primary. It takes a lot to run a campaign, way more than money. It takes so much time. It takes thick skin, and it takes a lot more. And I applaud both of you. Education is number one to me in the realm of topics. And so seeing that you are willing to run for such an important position as State Board of Education, I applaud both of you. Before we begin with the questions, I do want to let you know that we did discuss at length whether to ask the same questions of you as we asked earlier in the Democratic primary forum. And after much discussion, we decided that since they're so close together, it's not like you could get the questions and go research if you didn't know something. And also, these are the topics that are so critical right now. So we rearrange them a little bit like any good teachers would do, but basically they are the same questions. So just wanted to be very upfront about that. So we're going to start with a question that was sent to you. We will be going in the order of the ballot to start. So since LJ is first on the ballot, he will go first, and then Hilda, and then we'll just switch back and forth for each question. Okay. So the first question is the one that was sent to you. That will be a 1.5 minute answer, and all the rest are a minute. The question is, educators are dropping out of the profession due to the increased demands of state regulations many see as political rather than professional. How would you address their concerns? LJ.
Hi, thank you, Chris. So the first thing that comes to mind here is we need to be listening to our educators. We need to be listening to our teachers. And before COVID, teachers were projected by a national study to leave the education system about 1 in 6. Right after COVID, we see that number increase to 1 in 4 teachers say they are not only waiting to leave the education system at the end of the school year, but actually leave after this semester. So what we see here, and when I travel the district, are teachers who are frustrated. They are not being they're not being heard. Their initiatives are not being consulted when state members make legislation or rules. Teachers don't have enough time in the classroom to do the actual job of teaching. And this is something I feel very passionate about and would advocate for teachers having more time in the classroom. The other thing that's very important is to have a supportive district that will support teachers and support the work that they do for our amazing Texas school children. So all in all, we need to increase communication with our teachers, with our educators, and this will enable teachers to feel like they serve the very good purpose that they do serve in education, and present a well-rounded education system for our students.
Thank you. Hilda.
Well, Chris, first of all, I didn't receive any questions. So when you said the question was sent to you, I never received any questions. But I'll go ahead and take the question that you're asking. And it says that you are due to demands that are more political than professional. Well, I'd like to know is an example of some demands that are political and some demands that are not professional, because until we know what they are, then we need to address them. When you say teachers are leaving the profession due to demands that are more political than professional, well, what are those demands? I really would like to know and see how we can address those. And I know that teachers leave the profession, but that statistic that was mentioned by my opponent, is that a Texas statistic or is that a national statistic? In Texas, our teachers, I feel, have less strings attached to them or demands, because Texas is a right to work state. We don't have teacher unions that make mandates or force teachers to follow the union line. So again, as a former educator for 33 years and having worked within the politics and the professionalism of Texas teachers, I feel that I'd like to know what those demands are. You know, Chris, my first introduction to teacher politics years ago was a bumper sticker that said "Dump Dolph" on his asphalt, because Dolph Briscoe was the governor of Texas, and he had given more money to the highway department than the education department. And that was my introduction to teacher politics. Then we had another, or educational politics. Then we had another bumper sticker that said "Mark White out," because Governor White, Mark White, who was the governor of Texas at the time, was the one that initiated the teacher testing. The teachers had to take a test to prove their competency. So there have been many times, in many ways, that the Texas politics or the Texas government has interfered in teacher performances and teacher production. But again, I'd like to know what some of those political demands are before I can say, well, this is what I think. Because,
Okay, Hilda, sorry, time's up.
okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
Just do like this. Somebody do like this.
Okay. Well, I was trying to do it without being too
Okay.
dramatic.
Okay.
LJ, would you like to respond to that at all? Or are you ready to just move on?
I'll just respond briefly, Hilda, and that statistic was a national statistic, but the fact still remains that Texas teachers are, from the teachers I spoke to traveling the district from Hidalgo to Matagorda County, they are leaving the profession. They're not happy. And some who are staying in the profession, it's not a matter of the choice to stay, but some of them, they don't have another option. And most, if not all, really love teaching. And it's never about the money, but some things have really gotten politicized, in my opinion. And that really has to stop. And the way that stops is by us meeting with them, taking the time out to listen to them. And when we legislate or advocate for policies, we do so with the notion that teachers are going to be the ones that we're going to be depending on to carry out these policies with our school children.
Okay. So thank you. Second question, Hilda, we'll start with you.
Do I get to respond to that or not?
Oh, sure. Well, just go for it. The only reason I had LJ respond was because you actually called him out in your response. But if you feel a need to respond, go for it.
I just think that when you talk about teachers, listening to teachers and visiting with teachers, I was in the profession for 33 years. I was a teacher for 16 years and 17 years and an administrator for 16 years. So I was a teacher more than I was an administrator. But when you see both sides of it, you hear from, when you, as a teacher and an administrator, you are both sides of it. So you hear what teachers are saying. You get the feel for what teachers are saying. I substitute teach. I still go substitute teach so that I can get the feeling of what's happening in the schools. I've been retired for a while, but nevertheless, being in the classroom as a substitute teacher opens up to me, a lot of what is going on. So I feel like listening, communicating is being done, and perhaps maybe it just needs to be increased a little bit more or somewhat more.
Okay. Next question, Hilda, we're going to start with you on this one. What are your qualifications to serve on the State Board of Education?
Okay, Chris, well, first of all, like I said earlier, I have served in the Texas Public Schools for 33 years as a teacher, academic coach, and administrator. I also served on the McAllen School Board as a trustee. I've served on the Hidalgo County Head Start program as a policy council member, which is the school board for Head Start. And I was, because of COVID, probably the only one who served 5.5 years, because I think the terms are 4 years. I also have been a part of TASB when I was on the school board, and I served on their legislative committee, which meant that our committee would make recommendations to the legislature. And I just want to say one thing, Chris. When I got there as a member of the legislative committee, and I don't want to say it was me, it was our committee, I was shocked to find out that teacher salaries were not even on the top 10 priorities of what was being recommended by TASB to the legislature. So we worked real hard and had to really push some people on that committee or the whole TASB group to make teacher salaries in the top 10. And it made it to number 10. So there again, I've heard from teachers. I've talked to teachers. I also have worked with Texas.
So the time's up. Sorry, time's
Thanks.
up. Sure. LJ, same question.
Thank you, Chris. So I like to start out by saying that I'm just proud of being here from Jamaica, a lawful immigrant into this state and into our Texas. I am one of the Nueces County engineers, and I've also been very active in our community as well as in education. Two things I'd highlight that I'm most proud of that I've done here in the Coastal Bend. One is I've seen a need through engineering to educate our youth on water practices. And that's something in their science curriculum that they have not been getting. Students turn on the water, they don't even know that it's been treated at a water treatment plant and all the intricacies that goes into doing that. So that's one of the programs that I was proud to implement. The other thing that I've done was I have gotten $200,000 in federal aid to train teachers on how to develop curricula and experiential learning in the coastal bend. So those two things, as well as my wealth of involvement on state and local boards, are what I bring to the table.
Thank you. The next question will start with you, LJ. According to an opinion piece written by economist Ray Perryman in 2021, Texas ranks 41st nationally in spending per student. What are your suggestions for increasing funding for public education?
So one thing that have served me well is Texas schools are able to get a lot of grants through federal aid and through the state. So grant writing and grant access would be my number one go-to. Actually, the other thing that I would recommend also for increasing funding is at the local level. We need to partner with our communities. We need to advocate for our students and use our resources wisely. There are a lot of persons that I have spoken to up and down this district that are just passionate about education, but they're uninformed of some of the needs that teachers, educators, and administrators have. So actually using the funding that's available to them through philanthropists in their communities is very, very important. And a low-hanging fruit, actually.
Thank you. Hilda.
I think that we need to look at property taxes. We need to look at sales taxes. We need to look at grants. We need to look at ways that the state can and already finances public schools. I think that the more we learn about how these taxes work and how these taxes are applied in regards to education, the more we can do with them. Certainly grants are always available. I was one of the grant writers at PSJA ISD when we got the highest amount of money ever to restructure a middle school. And that was solely done through grants. So many school districts now employ grant writers or grant seekers and put together groups of teachers to write the grant as they see for their needs in the classroom. It's one thing for an administrator or a grant writer to write it, but it's another thing to put teachers together as a whole, a cadre of teachers, to make sure that these grants are written with the view of an educator, and that these grants are allotted to what teachers need. I'm also real proud to say that our retired teacher association, we've won 3 educational grants from the state to one of our school districts and teachers at Sherryland High School 3 years in a row. So yes, there's grants, we look at property taxes, look at sales taxes, and look for innovative ways to create more funding for our schools.
Thank you. Hilda, you'll go first on this one. One of the most controversial laws passed in Texas in 2021 was House Bill 3979, later replaced by Senate Bill 3, and known as Critical Race Theory Law. Do you support this law? Why or why not?
Well, first of all, Chris, when you talk about ethnic studies, when I first started working at PSJA, that was one of the first school districts that had instilled within its curriculum to have a Mexican American Studies course. And it was a 6-week course within the English curriculum at all 9, 10, 11, 12, so that students were exposed to Hispanic Mexican American writers and literature. You see, Chris, I believe that when children of all backgrounds and culture see themselves in literature, they see themselves in writing, in literature, in plays, in drama, they're going to be strengthened, their culture, their ideas, their beliefs. So I certainly believe in ethnic backgrounds, and I certainly believe in a variety of literature. ninth grade literature is world literature. But when I started teaching, there were very few Hispanic or Black or Asian or Indian writers included in that ninth grade curriculum. But as the years progressed, we got more and more and more. If you pick up a literature book right now and you go and look at some of the writers and the selections, it is very varied through all cultures and backgrounds. And I think that's important that we expose and reinforce our teachers and students on the many diversified cultures in Texas and the United States.
Thank you, LJ.
Thanks, Chris. The first thing that I would say is I'm not going to be, ginger about, the answer. And I realize my opponent didn't specifically say if she opposed or not. But in terms of critical race theory, which is teaching students to divide themselves based on race, I strongly oppose that. That is actually one of my platforms in this campaign. And as you could tell, I mentioned before, I'm from Jamaica. I came here from Jamaica to America. And it was just the push for excellence that got me to where I'm at right now. I have a master's degree in engineering and finishing my PhD. And no student should be taught to divide based on race. I mean, it's just ridiculous, Chris, that we have a social agenda in schools right now when students in Texas are failing at their grade level. We need to focus on the essentials, and that's something I've said up and down this district, and we need to get them to be able to master the essential subjects.
Thank you.
Chris, can I, since he called me out, may I say something?
Yes, ma'am. So I will allow you to answer, and then as we did before, I will allow LJ to respond as well.
When you say critical race law, as opposed to critical race theory, we're talking about instruction in our schools, Chris, that I believe our students need to be taught the truth. Certainly, there were some times in our country that were not the best and things didn't go, or they were very bad, or maybe they were very injustice. So I think that when you say critical race theory, that's one thing, but when you say critical race law, that's another. Of course, I don't agree with critical race theory in the terms of everything in the United States is bad. Everything that we've done is bad. We need to be more divisive. We need to teach our students the truth. We need to expose them to the truth. Why did this happen? When did it happen? What motivated these individuals to act this way, so that we can learn from it and stop it from ever happening again? I am opposed to critical race theory and critical race law. If it's a law that we have to teach it, no, I don't support that. I support instructing our students and teaching them the truth about this country, the benefits of this country, and like LJ, as an immigrant coming here and being able to do what he did, because I believe that still our educational system in this country is the best country in the world. Thank you.
Sure. LJ, before you respond, I just do want to clarify that when I read the question, I did say critical race theory law, because that is what the law is called. So LJ, would you like to respond any more to that, or?
I'd just like to say that, it's very important that we call a spade, is what I like to say. This legislation was put forth because we have seen, and parents have seen, and I have heard also from parents, that what they were teaching in school was not appropriate. They weren't teaching the full history, as some would say it. What they were teaching was specifically to separate students based on race and making one person feel inferior based on their color. No, I'll be honest with you, I've never heard or seen this before coming to America, even growing up in Jamaica, because we focus on the essential in schools. And we know that in order to be successful in our schools, we have limited time available. We have to make sure to use our resources as best as possible, our time as best as possible, and critical race theory serves no purpose in our Texas school education.
Okay, moving on, LJ, you will go first on this one. Do you support vouchers where tax money is used to send students to private and religious schools? Why or why not?
I do support vouchers. And the reason why is because, as I like to say, people vote with their feet. When you have a good product, you will get students to remain at your school because you have a good product at the school. And I'll just give you an example. As I said, not only did I grow up in Jamaica, I went to school in Jamaica, but I also did some graduate work in Europe as well, in Poland. And I'll let you know that K through 6 education is very popular for private school, but when you move to past grade 7, there is a great preponderance of students that opt to go to public schools because they have a great product there, they have a great history, and the voucher system allows and also puts parents in the driver's seat to make the best choice for their children. Every child can learn, and children are very meticulous in terms of what learning style prefers them. And I just wanted to say that, you know, parents, one of my platforms is to make parents have their responsibility for students, and this allows this.
Thank you, Hilda.
You know, vouchers, Chris, are really tax dollars. Vouchers come from tax dollars. I support the fact that a parent should be able to have a choice. If you look at choice and charter schools, if you do the research, it all goes back to Robert Kennedy. When Robert Kennedy said during the Kennedy administration, why shouldn't every parent have a right to send his or her child to a better school or make the lower schools better? So to me, I want parents to have a choice. And if it's because of vouchers that they have to do it because they don't have the money to pay for a faith-based education or a private education, then why not? Now, how those vouchers are determined and how those vouchers are allotted is something that we need to look at very critically. And I could go on and tell you my experience with that, but I know I don't have time. But yes, I do support vouchers in the sense that they are tax dollars anyway. It's not something that is coming out of somebody else's pocket. And if parents are paying school taxes, well, that's just part of the school tax issue.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question, Hilda's going to go first. But before I give you the question, I'm going to give a warning like I gave to the Democrat primary candidates. This is a lengthy question, okay? So bear with me. And we're on the topic of special education. When schools have higher numbers of certain ethnic or minority students enrolled in special education than they should have by statistical standards, it signals the possibility that some of the students may not be truly disabled and may have been incorrectly identified. In Texas, Hispanic students are frequently over-identified as students with an intellectual disability, previously known as mental retardation or learning disability. And Asian students are disproportionately identified as students with autism. How would you address the issue of disproportionately identifying minority students as students with disabilities? Hilda.
Well, first of all, Chris, I think that you need to look at the diagnosis. Who is preparing this diagnostic test? What kind of what does the test require? When you have children that come in and they're not doing well in English or math, is it a behavioral issue? Is it a learning issue? Is it a learning style issue? Is it a technique that needs to be used? You know, some kids are affected by light. Some kids are affected by noise. Some students are affected by proximity to others. Some students don't like to be near the window. Students don't like to be near a door. Where is the diagnosis coming from? That's what I want to know. I want to know who is designing this diagnosis, who is designing this, and how is it being designed so that we only are affecting Hispanic students or Asian students? Where is the gap there? Because I think when you have a disproportionately misidentified misidentity, well, why is that happening? Who's making that recommendation? And what is the diagnostic test? What is it based on? Whose basis is it on? What recommendations? What experts do we have in this field, other than just saying, well, he can't hear very well, so we're going to put him in special ed because, he did somebody test a child's hearing? Did somebody test the child's vision? Did somebody test a child's ability to, sit next to someone else, or a window or a light or a door? I think, but the bottom line, Chris, is the diagnosis is the issue with me. Who is making that diagnosis and how are they reaching it?
Okay, thank you. LJ.
I'd just like to extend Hilda's response to, and that is my question also. Who is making this diagnosis? And actually, I'll go a step further and saying that, I'm completing a PhD study, and most times when we see a statistic that shows a disproportionality is because of the actual test subject. So could it be that there is testing of Hispanic children and minority children only? And that's something that has to be looked into. The bigger part of the question that I would like to know would be, what is really going on in terms of schools focusing on the actual testing of these children? I mean, we need to be focused on teaching our children and making sure that they're getting all the essentials. Every child is different, and we know that. What we need to focus on is, how can we enable this child that is in front of me to learn, and to learn effectively with the tools that we have in front of us?
Thank you. LJ, you'll go first on the next question. As you both likely know, during each legislative session, the State Board of Education devises a legislative agenda. At this point right now, because I realize things may change by the time the legislature meets in 2023, but as of right now, as a member of the State Board of Education, what would you like to see on the 2023 State Board of Education legislative agenda, and why?
Very simple, Chris. I would definitely like to see a rehaul of the STAR test. I have a problem with the stress, and I didn't mention too much in my earlier conversation, but this is another stressor on teachers, as well as parents, as well as the education system. And I believe that there's a big problem with teaching to the test right now, especially in Texas. What we need to do, and at the legislative level, is to make sure that we do a deep dive on the STAR test and these high stakes tests that we offer our children. And that is simply what I would like to see be placed on the legislative agenda this year, Chris.
Thank you. Hilda.
Because I'd like to also talk about a little bit about this testing. You and I have been in education for a long time, and we have all kinds of testing. TOS test, TAKS test, STAR test, all these testing. And in my opinion, the testing, what needs to be said to the legislators, once we do this testing, let's focus on what kind of emphasis we're using for this testing. Because when you say, oh, you're a good school, or the principal gets more money, or the teacher, we're placing too much emphasis on those results as opposed to growth. If you tested in 1 year and another, how did the student grow from year 1 to year 2? I'd like for the legislature to look at growth amendment, or a growth statute, or a growth graph to show that the testing is actually proven to help students go from one to the other. And I don't agree with teaching to the test. And I don't think most teachers do. I know when I was a teacher, they would say, we got to teach this. You know what? I'm going to teach critical thinking, because I know that critical thinking is part of the test. I'm going to teach the grammar. I'm going to teach the reading, interpretation, application, all of that, because I know that's what's on the test, not because it's what you need to know for the test. To me, testing has a purpose, but it should be more of a growth purpose, not the whole thing.
Thank you. Okay, Hilda, you're going to go first.
Hmm?
Who do you think should set the policies for mask and vaccine mandates for students and staff in Texas public schools, and why?
I think we need to listen to the medical experts, Chris. I think that once a school board or a local community receives the information from the medical health experts, not the politicians, not what one political party says about the other, you look at the science of medicine. The science of medicine says this: wearing masks, 6 feet distancing, vaccination has a higher rate of protection, then let's go with that. Let's base it with that. Not because some people might think my kid's not going to wear a mask or my kid is. Let's look at what works, what has worked, what has been proven medically and scientifically to be the best way to deal with mask mandates and vaccination. I don't think that we need to rely on hearsay or on political say, but on scientific and medical expertise as to how well these issues work, and go from there.
Thank you, LJ.
So as a grassroots advocate, many would think that, I'm going to say the mandate should be regulated, by the school board at a local level, but I want to even go deeper. My take on this is that the parent is responsible for that child, right? And they are the persons who will listen to the experts, because remember, in America, we don't elect experts to make decisions. We elect politicians that are savvy politicians that know how to dissect good information and critical thinking to make good decisions on behalf of their citizens. But in this case, very unprecedented, I believe we don't need state legislation. We don't need a local school board legislation. The parents are responsible for their child, and they know more about that child. As we all know, that every child is different, and no one size fits all is a good model to use for a global pandemic such as this.
Interesting. Okay, so the next question, LJ, will start with you. This is another lengthy one. State Representative Matt Krause has called on public school libraries to remove any books that might generate, and I quote, discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress because of race or sex, unquote. In October, he distributed a watch list of 850 books, predominantly titles by women, authors of color, and books with LGBTQ themes and characters. Governor Abbott has called for a criminal investigation into the availability of, quote, pornographic, unquote, books in our public schools. LJ goes first. Do you believe local school officials, teachers, and school librarians should make the decision regarding books in the libraries, or is this a state issue?
Well, Chris, from what we have seen actually in the libraries, and I have seen it, me and my wife have been into our local libraries and several libraries across Texas. There are indeed several books that you don't deserve the quotes because they are indeed pornography. And what the issue is that our local school level and local officials were responsible to ensure that our students receive an education that is free from a social agenda, free from sexual education being pushed on them. And if you're someone who volunteers or is involved in any ministry at the church, we find out that if we're interested in students' future, that a lot of the times when we have stressors in the community, it's because these students and children have been exposed to sexual education from too young an age. So it is very important that we take a big step. And I would preface that saying that it would be good if our local level would be able to catch that and stop it. But right now, that's not being done, and we need to move aggressively.
Hilda, thank you. Hilda.
Well, I'd like to see that 850 book list. I'd like to see the list. You know, Chris, you can take a book like To Kill a Mockingbird, which was one of my students' favorite books, and make it a racist book. You can take, a lot of it depends on the interpretation and the delivery of the teacher. Now, I'm not going to say that we need to have books that are pornographic in our schools. In my classroom, everything was rated G. If you wanted to go to PG, you go to your parents. If you want to go to R, you go to your parents. If you want to go, but miss, we could, no. My classroom is rated G. And I think that yeah, I'd like to look at that list. And I think the local school board should be very aware. Chris, I knew of a play that was being presented at one of our public high schools here in McAllen. I'm not on the board anymore, and I was getting calls from parents. Hilda, how can they show this play? How can they do this on stage? And some of the things that were being done were really, Chris, they were awful. And I immediately called a couple of board. I said, are you aware of this play being done at this high school? No, they don't know. They didn't know. So ignorance is no excuse. I'd like to see that 850 book list. I'd like to make sure that the local school board members know what's on the school on that list and know what plays are being presented and what movies are being shown in the classroom, because they have a right to know so that the parents can know. If my child was exposed to something that I am not in agreement with, I'm going to go in the classroom and say, give him an alternate assignment. You can teach that book if you want, but I want my child to have an alternate assignment.
Okay, so this question has brought on some very strong emotions from both of you. So I want to stick with it for a minute. So LJ, I'm going to have you still continue going first. Hilda, is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to this whole idea of both parents, being aware, because we know that there are parents who are hyper aware and parents who aren't aware at all of what's going on in the classroom. And also touching, LJ, on what you said about that you have seen books that are of true concern to you and to your wife. So how do you think, and right now, the next question is going to deal with state board in this, but right now, just as a concerned parent, citizen, et cetera, how do you think that this should be addressed?
So one thing I think that we could do and that could be effective is just making sure that students that have access to the library, you put some sort of age restriction on it, because certain titles may be appropriate for older students, especially if you have a high school available. But we just need to be careful of not having, an all access for every title that may be sensitive and may elicit some response. So just special librarian skills that we know our great librarians have, they'll be able to keep that book and in safekeeping, so it's not checked out by an unassuming child. It's someone that is age appropriate, and the librarian can also help to coach this. So that's what I would suggest, Chris.
Thank you. Hilda?
I would suggest that parents be informed and aware. And Chris, let me just give you an example. A Prayer for Owen Meany is one of the best novels I've ever read. Okay, it was a great book. There was great opposition to that book at one time in McAllen ISD. This is long before I was on the board. And I couldn't understand why. I just couldn't understand it, because I had read the book. My students loved the book. Well, there was one little line that said something about a girl's breast. Okay, you see, those kind of things, we need to make sure that teachers have professional judgment. They have academic freedom. They know what works or what inspires students. And to me, teachers need to have that academic freedom, but at the same time be aware of how some of those things are being interpreted in the classroom and how they're being presented. There's all kinds of literature. I mean, if you look at senior literature, which is all British literature, you look at some of the William Shakespeare plays, there's certainly some things that people might interpret as pornographic or not appropriate. Let me just give you one little example. I was teaching in 11th grade literature, the book
Hilda,
about...
I'm sorry, the time is up.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, thank you. Okay, so one more question on this topic. You both certainly know that the State Board of Education is the body for getting the new textbooks. However, not in the role of the supplemental books or school library books. So what role, if any, do you think the State Board of Education should play in removing books from the school library? Hilda.
Well, I don't know that that's a role of the State Board of Education. When I look at the guidelines for the State Board of Education, it says here that we oversee, review and adopt instructional materials, setting curriculum standards, overseeing the Texas Permanent Fund, military reservation and school district, educator certification in charter schools. I think that if I'm on the State Board of Education and I get a list of 850 books, am I supposed to decide what works in one community and not the other? I think teachers, again, Chris, have the academic freedom to choose, but they also have to have the professionalism and the academic freedom for interpretation. And the school boards need to know what's on that reading list. Look at the reading list for the summer that English teachers provide. Look at the syllabus. How many parents actually look at the syllabus for school? And I'm just going to tell you this. The Salem Witch Trials, I was teaching that book. I had a parent come in and complain that I was teaching witchcraft to my students. And I was called into the principal's office, and why are you teaching witchcraft? And my daughter's not going to live. No, excuse me, sir, that is not the case at all. We're talking about a period in our history, again, where decisions were made historically, but through fiction on certain social and religious issues. And once I explained that to the parent, he got mad at the child because the child went home and told him, oh yes, we're studying about witches in Mr. Shazel's class. Okay, and that's often the way it happens.
Thank you. LJ.
Thanks, Chris. Two things come to mind here. Hilda is correct. When you look at the education code, it doesn't specifically outline this responsibility of the state code. But Chris, let me be clear that we on the State Board of Education should be looking for areas and also working with the governor, who, by the way, instructed the State Board of Education to take a closer look at this issue to make sure that students are protected. Chris, I have traveled this district. It's about 8 months now since I've been on the campaign trail, and parents are looking for our leadership. They're looking for leaders like us who will help them when they feel like their voices are not being heard. So the State Board of Education is indeed a great place to be able to, we're not going to look at all 800 books, but we are in a position to provide oversight and leadership. That's what we do. We allow these policies to be in place to make sure that we're protecting our Texas school children.
Thank you. That was a great conversation about this. The next question, LJ, will start with you. And actually the next two questions will switch, but the next two questions are dealing with charter schools, public charter schools. LJ, would you support or oppose legislation that requires charter schools to have an elected body like public school districts have an elected school board?
So Chris, this question is kind of funny because as we know, the reason for an elected public body on the school board and ISD is because they're using and they're taking public funds, so tax in the local district. I see no reason why a charter school needs a elected public body. I certainly don't think that it would hurt, but I seem to wonder why there is this push for an elected public body. The reason why ISDs have this and they need it is because there needs to be oversight on the public funds that that they use locally. See, Chris, there is a two-tier to funding schools in Texas. We have the local funds derived from our taxes or local taxes, and then we have state funds. which state funds are what the charter schools receive. And they are able to use that with the donations that they get from private entities. So at this time, I would oppose this legislation because right now I don't see any need for it. And when you put new legislation, that means more money into programs like this.
Hilda.
Well, I think, Chris, that when you have an elected school board as opposed to an appointed board, things change. Because sometimes those elected school boards, as you and I know, can get highly political and they can get highly controversial based on who is supporting you, okay? And you're picked to run or you're asked to run because they want you to do something on that board for them. So what's the difference between a charter school having appointed board members? What I want to know is who's making those appointments? Because whether you're elected or appointed, somebody's going to put you there because they want you to do something for them. They want you to represent them. So again, if you have an elected board like you do in public schools, which seems to have worked for, throughout the centuries or the years, and then you say to the charter schools, well, you have to have elected officials. I think that we need to look at who's making those appointments. I've been to some of the charter school fundraisers and meetings where they've had their appointments. As a matter of fact, I was asked to be an appointee and I wasn't able to, I just didn't want to do that at the time. But I think a lot of it depends on what the appointments, who is appointing these people to charter schools to be their governing board, who's making the appointments. And if you're going to do elected ones, okay, if that's what you want to do, then we're going to have to go through the whole election cycle and you're going to have politicians promising this and promising that, which might help, which might not. I just think if the charter schools, if that's what the community thinks they ought to do, then that's the community governs them.
Okay, I need to follow up on this one because LJ, I'm not quite sure that I understood what you meant when you said that public schools have an elected board because they're using public funds, but charter schools are too. And so I'm thinking that I might have misunderstood what you meant, but in case anybody listening also did, I would like to ask you to clarify that.
Thank you, Chris, for allowing me to clarify. So just to reiterate, there's a two-tiered system on school funding, public school funding, which charter schools are considered public schools, quote unquote, public schools. The regular ISDs get funding from their local tax revenue and also state funds. The charter school only is eligible to get the state funds and not the local tax at the local level. So that's why I believe that there's no need for an actual board at the local level because they're not spending that locally derived tax revenue funds from that district. And that's what I meant by that, Chris. And I went on to further say that whenever we enable legislation, we need to look at the financial consequences. And as my opponent rightly said, once you have an elected board, there are certain specialties that we have to take into consideration, and that always leads to more money. We just need to let charter schools do what they do best and support our public schools, which are very important to our Texas school children.
Thank you for that clarification. Hilda, would you like to add anything?
No, I'm okay.
Okay. So Hilda, the next question starts with you. And we're still on the topic of charter schools. This is our final question regarding charters. A state law passed in 2015. Okay, I thought somebody said something. Sorry. Let me start again. A state law passed in 2015 requires that public entities report all contracts that must be approved by a governing board or that are worth more than $1 million. However, the Texas Attorney General ruled that a charter school, unlike a traditional public school, is not a public entity and therefore does not have to report such contracts. Would you support or oppose legislation that would include charter schools in the definition of public entity? Why or why not?
Well, Chris, if charter schools are receiving taxpayer dollars, they need to tell us where they're spending them. That's the bottom line. And charter schools do get public funds. So if you're going to get public funds from my tax dollars, yes, I think that if I want to know where you're spending them, then I should know. Now, a lot of charter schools get money from grants that are private. They have big fundraisers with celebrities that are private. So if you're running your charter school solely on private funds, then it's their business. But the minute they take a nickel or a dollar from the taxpayers, then we need to know where that money is going. And I think charter schools have a formula that has worked for them. And if it works for them, that's fine. But again, I'm going to say they need to be held accountable to taxpayer dollars.
Thank you. LJ?
Thank you, Chris. See, one of the other platforms in my campaign is high accountability for both public and charter schools. And actually, I was talking with a teacher and she asked me what I meant by this, and a very similar conversation. I would support legislation to allow charter schools to show this disclosure to the public. But let me be clear, Chris, that two things. One, when the Attorney General made that ruling, he was ruling according to law. Right now, they are not considered public entities by the definition that's in our Texas laws. So if we need to do a cleanup bill, that might be in order. And two, Chris, the fact that our charter schools right now, they do have laws right now, open law rules that allows any member of the public to see their books. So I just want to be clear to our viewers that they can't hide the money. We can ask to see it, but it's just not in the form that we are used to from our public schools, but it is available and their books are wide open for us as the public to see.
Thank you. Okay, LJ, you're first on this one. Texas counseling clinics and hospitals showed large increases in students seeking help for anxiety, depression, and thoughts of suicide. According to this report, students are wrestling with their loss of freedom, fears of contracting COVID-19, and grief over loved ones who died from the virus. And the state needs to step up its efforts to help them. This was in the Texas Tribune this year. How can schools best help students with these social emotional needs?
So I think the best place to start, as I will always say, is at the home with the parents. You know, Chris, a lot of students are very they're unique, and each child, we can't have a one size fits all for every child. What we need to do is start with the parents. If there's a concern, and as teachers, educators, we're the first person to see that child and interact with that child on a number of occasions during the school hours. So we need to make sure that we're reporting this to the parents and following up with counselors and just taking these steps with our best practices that we know that will work for that particular student. But that's what we do. We do it on a case-by-case basis and just provide that support for them. We also need to let kids be kids. You know, they're being stressed right now because of several reasons. One of those reasons are because of the tests that I mentioned, and also because of the mandates that they're being held to do. And, you know, parents are not allowed to make those concessions as they see fit.
Thank you. Hilda.
You know, Chris, kids nowadays are exposed to so much on social media, on television, on TikTok and Facebook and all this, that I think a lot of what their fears and their anxieties may be propagated by such things. But I really think that we need to, in the schools, have sessions, not so much by the teachers, but maybe take groups of kids, like, we used to pull kids out for an enhanced enrichment program. Take them out periodically to have a mental health counseling session. Just every so often, make it a point during advisory period, or just phase it into the public school day or the public school week, to where we take these children out, all of our kids, and just let them talk. And let them talk to a trained professional that can pick up on nuances, that can pick up on hints or clues that someone is hurting because of something, okay? I think we need to focus on support the hard hit populations that were hard hit with situations like this. And we also need to have some community partnerships. We could do after school sessions at the Boys and Girls Club. We could do faith-based organizations that'll take the children that are within their religious communities, and the public schools could send a trained professional to 100 minutes a week or so many minutes a day. But we need to make sure that we can identify these hard hit populations that we have on campus, not one counselor for 2,000 kids, but have the kids go for enrichment, mental health enrichment.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question before closing. And that question is going to be about the STAR test, because you guys have brought that up and there were no questions about the STAR. I grew up in Illinois. However, we took the Iowa test of basic skills, ITPS. And that test we didn't even hear about from the teachers until the day before, and they would say, be sure to get plenty of rest tonight and bring a number 2 pencil or something to that effect. Other than that, the rest of the time we never heard about the test. We were never taught the test. So my question is, and I will start with you, Hilda, is what are your feelings about the STAR? Like, get rid of the STAR altogether, just stop teaching to it. Where do you stand on the STAR?
I like I said before, Chris, testing has its purpose. Testing serves a purpose. What I don't agree with, and I'll never teach to the test, because most of those tests, because you said it yourself, Iowa tests are basic skills. Basic skills is what I would tell my students. This is a test that tests your very basic skills, not your higher learning skills, your higher thinking skills, your critical. All of you in my classroom should be able to ace that test, should be able to not have any problems with it. Now, when you go and you take a test result, the numbers, and you use them for things that are not useful to growth, that are not useful to academic achievement, that are not purposeful for academic training, that are not useful for growth in student learning, that's where I have a problem. Don't blame it on the teachers. Don't say, well, you're going to, because teachers are going to say, well, I got all the bad kids. Well, I got all the good kids. Okay, stop.
Oh, okay. LJ.
Thank you, Chris. My thoughts on the STAR test is that the STAR test needs a revamp. I'm sure that everyone was well-intentioned to get a model that provides some level of measurement. And that level of measurement, if used properly, could provide some good results for students and our educators to be able to gauge students and their progress and where efforts need to be focused on. But the minute, as Hilda said, that you use this test to provide for other measures that a test is not designed to do, then you have the stressors. And the stressors are coming down from the administrators to the teachers, and from teachers to the students. And also parents are wrapped up into that, because we have to prepare that student for the test. So there's too much testing. And the STAR test is not serving its purpose. And that's why that's the one thing that I am going to put on the agenda when I get elected to the State Board of Education.
Okay. Wow. This has been super informative. I'm very grateful that you guys were so awake and everything, seeing how it's already 9:04 p.m. But I just wanted to thank you both before you give your closing statements, and to tell you again how much I appreciate that you chose to run for State Board of Education. It's so critical to our community, our state, and our nation and beyond. So LJ, I'm going to start with you. If you can give your closing statement.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Futura RGV and partners and my challenger, Hilda, for this great debate. You know, when I entered this race, I was just thinking of little LJ in Jamaica, who had the opportunity to receive an education without a social agenda, without the bureaucrats telling educators, teachers what to do. I believe the State Board of Education serves a great purpose in our district, and that is to provide oversight. That is to use our leadership skills to help students. For far too long, this district has been performing well below average. And actually, as the Rio Grande Valley and South Texas, we can and we will be #1 in this state. And Texas itself will be #1 in this country. We have the tools that we need to succeed. And through hard work, through partnership with teachers, educators, parents, and the community, we can make this happen. And I'm proud to be a representative to make this a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilda.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Nedra, for your Futuro RGB program. I watch it all the time. I listen to all the candidates, whether they're school board or county judge or whatever. I feel that I am the better of the two candidates, Chris, and it's basically because of my experience in the public schools. I think it's admirable that my opponent has taken on this candidacy, and I think it's great to see young people want to get involved in our schools. But if you draw the bottom line is, I have the experience, Chris, I have the dedication, I have been in public schools, I've served in many boards with public schools, I've written curriculum, I've worked on textbook adoption committees. And you know what, Chris, I'm 68 years old and I retired, and I felt like, you know what, I want to do this because I really think the State Board of Education needs attention. You go out there and ask how many people who their State Board of Education members are, they're not going to tell you who they are. We're at the very bottom of the ballot, the very last one. And I think we need to pay it more attention, and you need somebody like me who knows the business. Thank you.
Thank you both again, and best of luck on the rest of the trail and during the election. Nedra.
Okay, Chris, what a great job you and our candidates have done tonight for the voters in letting them know, as you have said, how very important this State Board of Education election is, how very important they are to our kids, our communities, and to our future. And so I want to thank the candidates. I want to thank you, Chris. I want to thank our technical staff and all the FaceTime and website viewers who view this campaign forum before election on March 1. So early voting is February 14 through February 25th. And election day is March 1. And again, I keep telling us, Futura RGV's message is exercise your duty, exercise your right, and exercise your privilege to vote. Be an informed voter, and then go and vote. So thank you all and good night.